We're going to start this episode with something I saw posted on a few days ago. Uh, in quote, Christian parents have a duty to help their children find godly spouses. It is sub-Christian to say, and this is what, other people might say. Once they're 18, they're on their own. They need to figure it out themselves. End quote. And that was from a guy named Eric Kahn of Refuge Church in Ogden, Utah. And that was August the 8th, 2025 on X, or what you used to call Twitter. So, Lori, which part of that statement do you agree with?
Um, I would say sub-Christian just to have that mindset. So
Yeah,
once they're 18, they're on their own, and you don't have any more influence over them.
yeah. But, I think not that we need to say, okay, son, I just picked your wife. That girl over there in church, we like her parents, and y'all two are going to get married. We're going to arrange it. Which, I mean, I wish that would work. That'd be great. If a good Christian couple that we know had a good girl that our boy can marry, that'd be great if we could arrange that. But we don't live in that time frame. We don't live in that culture.
No.
But I could say, son, that's a nice girl, and I think you might need to get to know her. She's a good Christian girl. We can do that. We can influence them instead of saying, okay, you're 18 and you're going to college and
Good luck.
good luck. Hope you find a good Christian girl, but if you don't, hey, I just want you to be happy. Well, anyway, to me, it seems most Christians, Protestant, evangelical, church going Christians would agree that their children just need to figure it out. I hate to say it, but I think they would probably say, well, you can't force them to do what they don't want to do. You just gotta let them do their own thing. Um, Christian parents simply allow their children, even approve of them marrying someone who isn't a Christian.
So today we're going to finish our series on being unequally yoked in marriage. Last episode, we talked about Christians dating non-Christians, and we strongly cautioned against this. Today we're going to discuss marriages where one spouse is a Christian and the other spouse is not a Christian. So what do you do in a situation like this? Stay tuned.
Stay tuned. Okay, hey, let me explain who Eric Kahn is before we start this main episode. He is one of the pastors under another guy named Ryan Suave. Who's Ryan Suave?
He co-hosts a podcast called Haunted Cosmos.
Yeah, they're pretty cool. They do kind of what they do, like
They
paranormal or
all things supernatural, paranormal,
in a Christian perspective.
from a biblical perspective. And I think a lot
It's
of
kind of
Christians
sidetracked.
nowadays don't really believe there is a supernatural side, but the Bible's very clear that there is a spiritual side of
We're
things.
getting up. Hold on, we're getting off track, but it's fun. We're going to keep doing this for just a minute because this is cool. We are going to get back to our marriage episode, but yeah, keep going. That haunted cosmos. Look it up. Keep talking a little bit more about that.
They talk about all kinds of things, whether it's cryptids, which are like Bigfoot stuff like that, or ghosts and things like that. Just all the weird stuff that the church avoids talking about.
Yeah,
But they come to it with a biblical perspective and try to explain things through that lens. And so it's fascinating.
like one of those shows they're talking about the giants, Goliath and the giants, and in the Bible, and I mean what they talked about. I looked it up, and I'm thinking that's they're onto something. Nothing they said was absolutely wrong, and they're lying. If they're speculating, they'll say they're speculating. But anyway,
Mm.
haunted cosmos. But anyway, back to Eric Kahn. Eric Kahn is one of the pastors of Refuge Church. He has a couple of YouTube shows, uh, Kingdom's Men, and he's good friends with a guy named Joel Webbin. I don't know if you know him, another Reformed guy. But anyways, um, he's big on women stay at home. Not like Doug Wilson. He's not a Doug Wilson guy. So let's get that up front. He is good about the biblical roles of husbands and wives, and most of what he said I kind of agree with. There's some things I don't agree with, but but anyway, that the guy I quoted, that's who he is. Go ahead, Lord. Now let's move on to our second point. And this is the second part of our series. Last week we talked about dating. Should a Christian date a non-Christian? And we said no, should not. So now we move on to our second point. And for this, we're going to read 1 Corinthians chapter 7, verses 12 through 16. I got that right. I think I got it right. Last time I messed it up. So I think I got it right this time. Again, are you a faithful, believing Christian and you're married to someone who is not? Okay. That's what we're going to talk about today. That's the premise. You're a faithful married Christian. And so faithful, I mean that you take it seriously. I don't want to trip you up with that word, faithful Christian. Well, you think I'm not? Well, I don't know. That's up for you to judge. And you're a Christian and you take your faith seriously, but you're married to someone who isn't, or maybe they don't. They say they are, but they don't take it seriously. That could be a part too. How do you handle this? You're a Christian married to a non-believer or somebody of a different faith, or a Christian in name, but they don't live it out. The early Christians, as we see in the book of 1 Corinthians, were faced with a similar situation, and Paul wrote to them addressing this. So let's see what Paul writes here in 1 Corinthians chapter 7, verses 12 through 16. He says, "But to the rest I say, not the Lord." So Paul's saying, look, this is not God's advice, but me as the Lord's mouthpiece. I'm sure that God's going to, the Holy Spirit is speaking through me. So this is not God speaking. This is the Apostle Paul speaking. That's what he's saying. But I trust what he says. That if, and you know what, it'd be no different than our pastor at church saying, "Let me give you some advice." I'm going to trust what he says. Um, that if any brother has a wife who is an unbeliever and she consents to live with him, he must not divorce her. Okay, so you got a husband that has a wife who's not a believer, but he loves her and she treats him good. Just because she's not a believer doesn't mean he can get rid of her. Okay, so verse 13, and a woman who has an unbelieving husband and he consents to live with her, she must not send her husband away. So it's the same thing. So let's say a woman's a Christian, the wife, and her husband's not, but the husband treats her good. She can't just say, "Well, you're not a Christian, so I got to get rid of you." Paul's saying, don't do that. So verse 14, for the unbelieving husband is sanctified through his wife, and the unbelieving wife sanctified through her believing husband. For otherwise your children are unclean, but now they are holy. If the unbelieving one leaves, let him leave. The brother or sister is not under bondage in such cases, but God has called us to peace. For how do you know, O wife, whether you will save your husband? Or how do you know, O husband, whether you will save your wife? Okay, so um, for some context here, the people in Corinth, they were mainly pagan Greeks. You know, there were some Jews that were living there from the time that they had been dispersed. They just never came back. And some people had moved to other regions of the Greece and Roman Empire and Macedonia. So there were some people that were Jews living in Corinth, but he's mainly speaking. I mean, I guess he could be speaking to Jews. Jews could have been married to non-believers, but for the most part, Jews are pretty strict in who they marry. They pretty much married other Jews. So he's kind of addressing the pagan, Corinthian, Macedonian, Greek-born people. They become Christians, but maybe their spouse, their husband or their wife, still worship the Greek gods. They still worship Zeus or Aphrodite or whatever it is. Okay. Uh, in chapter 7, Paul addresses many different issues of marriage, but we're only looking at this passage here, where he speaks of marriages between believers and unbelievers. That situation. Some in Corinth who became believers of Jesus Christ. They had unbelieving spouse. They felt that they should be able to do away with their spouse, or you might say annul it or get divorced. Paul's saying, hold on, don't do that. Not yet. Let me give you some advice. And we're going to use that advice today. Uh, Paul doesn't immediately tell them, okay, here's what you do. Divorce them. If your spouse is not a Christian, I don't care how good they are. Get rid of them. He doesn't say that. Uh, Instead, he gives some good, godly advice, Holy Spirit led advice. I believe we can still use this advice today. So let me list what Paul says in these situations. First, he says, if you're a Christian, you're married to an unbeliever, a non Christian. if the unbeliever treats you good. So let's say your husband is married to an unbelieving wife. The wife treats him good, and he's pleased with her, other than the fact that she's not a Christian. Or the wife is a Christian, and she's married to a non-believer, still worships Zeus, but he treats her good, other than the fact that he's not a Christian. Okay. Uh, you as a Christian in that situation, you're a Christian and you're married to a non-Christian. Marriage is otherwise good. Paul's saying you cannot divorce that person for the fact that they're not a Christian. Lori, do you agree with this? How easy would it be for a Christian spouse to live in this situation?
Well, I agree with this, but there's going to be problems in the marriage because a marriage is a Christian institution. And so, as a married couple, you're supposed to be individually putting God first, and then, you're together putting God first. And it's kind of hard to do that if only one of you is a believer and the other one is not. So, I would think that that would cause problems. Um, if I was the believing spouse, I would really be burdened for my spouse that wasn't believing. So, I would think that that would be a stressful situation for that spouse or for that marriage. And, it causes other problems, which we'll get into here in a little bit. But I mean, I agree with what he says. Stay married, but you are going to have some problems, but hopefully you can, be a witness to them. And we'll get into that here in a little bit.
Yeah, yeah. Do you think? Well, I don't necessarily think that happens. I don't think I can't think of any examples to where a Christian divorced somebody that wasn't a Christian. Or
I can't think of any personal
maybe the other way.
examples. Yeah.
I'm wanting to say it's going to be the other way. I'm wanting to say if a divorce happens in that situation, it's going to be the non-believer says, I'm tired of this self-righteous Christian.
Yeah.
She's ruining all my fun. I got to get rid of her. Okay, so in verse 12, Paul instructs the Christian husband that if he has an unbelieving wife and she's happy, he must not divorce her. In verse 13, Paul instructs the Christian wife that if she has an unbelieving husband and she's happy with him, she must not divorce him. And I kind of talked about that. I'm kind of going over it again. Then in verse 14, he speaks about how the unbelieving spouse is sanctified through the believer. Is Paul saying that, say I'm a Christian and you're not? Does that make you holy?
No.
No. So what is Paul saying? He's saying that the Christian spouse demonstrates the grace of God through the gospel lived out in his life or her life to the other spouse. And that creates an opportunity for the other spouse to be made holy, to be saved, to become a Christian. So the spouse, and if the spouse that's a Christian is living that godly, Christ-like example, the other spouse is going to see it, and hopefully they're going to get to points like, you know what, this is the way to be. My husband or my wife that's a believer in Jesus, I see all the good things about her or him, and I want to be like that. That's what I think Paul is trying to say here. Like it or not, a Christian man or a woman who has a non-Christian husband or wife does not have grounds of divorce in that case alone, especially if the non-Christian spouse is pleasing uh, to the Christian spouse. So here's the ultimate question, Lori. I think I alluded to that in the last video, but if I was not a Christian and we were married and I treated you well, how would you deal with that?
Well, I would take every opportunity that I had to try to talk to you about it, to witness to you about it. But there's a fine line. I mean, you don't want to do it so much where you chase off your spouse, but you can't just ignore it either. You can't just, well, we're just not going to talk about that because then I feel like you're not really loving your spouse if you don't at least make an effort to share the gospel with them and not just verbally. If they don't want to talk about it, then the best you can do is live, just like you said, live a gospel centered life and let them see you reading the Bible, let them see you going to church, let them see you, as a wife being submissive to her husband, just like the Bible teaches. And
Even if the husband's not a Christian, you would still have to be submissive, right?
right.
If you want to be obedient to God.
I mean, you're not going to win him over by being uh, disagreeing with everything and argumentative and nitpicky. And, that's not going to lead him to Christ. So you have to be living a way that will honor Christ so that maybe that will help. At least help them soften their heart, so where you can talk to them.
Right. I don't know of any married couples that gotten a divorce because of different faiths, but I do know some. I'm thinking about right now. I'm thinking about one in particular who's married to a non-believer, and I never see that other spouse. I see the person from time to time, the Christian person, but I never see that spouse. So I don't know. I don't know how that relationship goes. I hope it. I mean, I'm sure it's good. I haven't heard that that other spouse is mistreating the other spouse, but there are certain people that I know that I see them in church, or I know they're a Christian, but I never see the other spouse go to church. So, but anyway, Paul does not. Paul does give instruction for the situation where an unbelieving spouse leaves. So now we're going to talk about it ain't working. What can you do if your unbelieving spouse is hostile towards you? So he talks about that. He writes in verse 15, if the unbelieving one leaves, let him leave. The brother or sister is not under bondage in such cases, but God has called us to peace. Paul is dealing with situations in Corinth where a Christian spouse has a believer who's not in agreement with the believer's faith, and the marriage suffers for it. And the unbeliever does not want to be married to a Christian. And I think there's some good instructions for us today. And Laura and I both agree that you should work at preserving your marriage at all costs. And divorce is not the best answer. But there are sometimes there when it may come a time to let your spouse go. So I'm going to ask you another question. Before I do, let me put a little context here. So, and you got to think, if you ever, those of you that study Greek mythology or Roman mythology, uh, that pagan worship, the Greek gods, they go on for centuries.
Mm-hmm.
I think during the same time when Moses was with the people of Israel out in the Sinai desert, the Greeks were worshiping the. So I think the Greek mythology probably preceded Moses in the desert. So that Greek mythology was they were steep in it, and that's something that's hard to just get away from. So if you got a Greek person from Corinth married to a Christian that used to be a pagan worshiper, it'd be hard for that guy that's worshiping Zeus to say, "I'm not stopping worshiping Zeus. And you can't make me worship Jesus." And that person could become hostile. And if that person just says, I'm not worshiping your Jesus. I'm worshiping Zeus, and one of us has to go. And if that person goes, Paul's saying, there's nothing you can do about it.
Mm-hmm.
Let him go. You can't force that person to stay. So, Lord, what would be some reasons today you would say that would lead a Christian to divorcing a non-Christian spouse?
The only couple I can think of is if the unbelieving spouse is being abusive, whether it's physical abuse or verbal abuse or just being hostile in general, forbidding you to go to church, forbidding you to read your Bible, just you're not going to do that. I just feel like in that case, then divorce would be okay because if you have an unbelieving spouse that's letting you go to church and letting you practice your faith, that's one thing. But if they refuse to let you practice your faith, then I believe that would be a cause for divorce.
And again, we're not talking about a husband and a wife who are both Christians. That's a
Yeah.
totally different issue.
Yeah.
If you got a husband and a wife that are both Christians and there's issues, then they should work that out. Maybe find good godly counseling. And Ryan and Selena Frederick would tell us to go seek counseling at your church, but I can't tell you that because, like at our church, there's really there's not a lot of churches that is equipped to handling marital counseling. But in this episode, we're talking about a Christian who's married to a non-Christian. Sometimes a non-believing spouse can cause conflict in the marriage by refusing to conform to the Christian faith of the other spouse. And that conflict can be unreconcilable. That person could become hostile toward the Christian
Mm.
spouse's faith and become aggressive and threatening. And they could, I guess, I guess you could think of a lot of possibilities. They could probably refuse to pay the bills or refuse to support you or um, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
If a non-Christian spouse will not conform to the Christian faith of the other spouse, the marriage at best will be difficult, and it could be a time to where the spouse just lives there. And usually in today's time, it's the man, the husband, that's not the Christian, but the wife is, and the wife's the one taking the kids to church and serving in the church. And if that's a situation, if there's a Christian and a non-Christian, it's usually the husband, the man, and a lot of times he's just indifferent. Oh, there they are. There's my wife and them kids going to church. Bye. You know,
Mm-hmm.
and they're what do you call it? Just kind of standoffish,
Mm-hmm.
not really abusive, but standoffish and uh, borderline disrespectful, but not very loving. They're not very loving.
Yeah.
So it's kind of tough. It's almost not really grounds for divorce, but it's not really a loving relationship.
Mm-hmm.
So that's tough. But sometimes that leads to bitterness. And I'm telling you, I've seen people when I'm growing up in situations like that where they stay married like that and the marriage is miserable until one of them dies. Uh, if the non Christian spouse becomes hostile, unloving, and abusive because of the differences in the two spouses' faith, that may lead to the ending of the marriage. And as I'm thinking about this, the unbelieving spouse, let's say the husband, becomes jealous or bitter or resentful for the other person, the wife, and it causes anger and rage, and that leads to uh, all kinds of bad stuff. Huh?
Mm-hmm.
Nope. So I made a list of what I feel are absolute deal breakers in a situation to where you got a Christian spouse married to a non-Christian spouse, and the non-Christian spouse is not content, and they get to the point where Paul said you got to let them go. So unrepentant adultery. Now, I was listening to, I think it was Joe Webbin a couple months ago, and they were talking about this. They were saying adultery doesn't necessarily constitute divorce. Unrepentant adultery, yes. You can't live with a spouse that continually has an affair and is not remorseful for it.
Mm-hmm.
But if a husband says, my wife, who I love so very much, I had an affair with so and so, whatever, and it's over. I'm done with it. I promise you, it's over. I'm asking for forgiveness. The wife shouldn't say, "That's too bad. I'm divorcing you."
Yeah.
Right? It shouldn't. They shouldn't do that.
Yeah. If they're truly repentant and they want to work things out, then you should try to work it out.
Right?
Try to.
Even if the spouse is not a Christian,
Mm-hmm.
that right there. And you know what? I hate to say this, but if that's a situation where the unbelieving spouse. Let's say the husband is not a Christian and he has an affair, and then he realizes, you know what, my loving wife is a God fearing, Jesus lover Christian, and I just did something that she's being taught and read in her Bible not to do. So I've offended her, and I come to her and I ask for forgiveness. That might lead him to become a Christian.
Mm-hmm.
Hate to say it, but sometimes the only way to get through to some people is through tragedy,
Mm-hmm.
through tough times. That's the only way to get through to some people. But let's say you get that spouse, the husband. We're gonna pick on the husband because us men we're easy to pick on. So that husband is an unbeliever and he has an affair and she finds out and he goes, yep, yep. So what?
Mm-hmm.
What are you gonna do about it? What are you gonna do about it, wife? What does Paul say to do? Let him go.
Let 'em
Let him go. Then another one is unrepentant abuse. I just I'm the unbelieving husband. I just beat you down. You know,
Mm-hmm.
I just come in and slap you around. For one, you touch a woman, you're going to jail. That's the way I see it.
Yeah.
Touch a woman, you're going to jail. That's it. I don't care who you are. Um, and I think she would feel the same. If for some reason I was to hit her, she'd probably call the cops, and she should. But I wouldn't do that. But if a husband, unbelieving husband, or even a wife, a husband ain't got to take a man ain't got to take abuse from a woman.
Nope.
You shouldn't do that. To me, if you got a wife beating your husband down, that husband could get to the point where he's like, I gotta let you go. I can't take this. You can't kill me. Or it could be physical abuse, or it could be verbal abuse. Like I said, that husband could be resentful. You Christian, you just a hypocrite. And I start calling her name because of her Christianity, and
Mhm.
I start beating her down, and you just self-righteous, and you ain't no good. And next thing you know, I'm cussing at her and berating her, and she can only take that so much.
Mhm.
Or sexual abuse. And hey, if you're an unbeliever, your sexual views, your view of sexuality it ain't from God. If you're not a Christian, you don't have a Christian view on sexuality.
Mhm.
You might. If you're married to a good Christian woman, or if you're a woman married to a good Christian man, that believing spouse might lead you into adapting their Christian view of sexuality. But if let's go back to the man. Let's say the husband is sexually abusing or physically violent in that way to a wife, and he doesn't stop. That wife ain't got to sit there and take it. According to Paul here in 1 Corinthians 7 verses 15 and 16, a woman can let him go. A lot of people ain't gonna like this, but I want somebody to comment and tell me in this video, comment and tell me that a wife needs to be abused physically, verbally, or sexually. That she needs to continue to take that.
Yep.
Okay, finally wrapping up this conversation, we're gonna move on to something else. Um, well, I got one more thing. An abandonment. Let's just say the husband's not abusive. He's not verbally or sexually. I don't like living with this Christian woman and her Christian kids, and I just can't do it. So I'm just gonna hit the road.
Mhm.
And she can't find him. She can't convince him to come back. He moved out. That wife ain't got to live by herself and raise them kids.
Yeah.
No, let him go. Divorce. Finally, wrapping this conversation up, and we're going to talk about something else. Just like in Corinth, when Paul wrote to them, there are different types of situations where marriages consist of one believing Christian and an unbeliever, and it causes difficulties in marriage, just like we talked about. And we're kind of graphic here,
Mm.
but there's hope. You have a situation where a Christian marries a non-Christian. We strongly we strongly discourage this. We're not going to just change our view. Well, maybe we were too hard on that. No,
Nope.
we strongly discourage a Christian marrying a non-Christian, and they try to work their marriage out. That's good. They're going to try to work it out. Then you have a situation where two unbelievers get married. One becomes a Christian, but the other one doesn't. Let's say Lori's not a Christian. I'm not a Christian. We get married. She becomes a Christian. She can't just say, you know what? Joey's an unbeliever. I'm a Christian. I should divorce him. But that was going on in Corinth. Paul said, no, don't do that. It's good, wife, that you became a Christian. Now, show that example to your husband, and hopefully he'll become a Christian. And so that's what's going on, and that still goes on today. In both situations, I advise that the Christian spouse should continually be a witness and example to the unbelieving spouse by their word and their action. Just love them. Love the unbelieving spouse. Don't belittle them. Don't beat them down with the Bible. Uh, just show him love and grace and mercy. And if the non-believing spouse sees the Christian spouse living a positive Christian lifestyle, that non-believing spouse might eventually say, "This is what I need to do. I'm just a worldly man, and this Christian wife just loves me anyways. Maybe I need to figure out what it is she's got, and I need to get that."
Mm-hmm.
Uh, the Christian spouse must be loving, kind, and patient and understanding to the non-believer. Don't be overcritical or judgmental because of the spouse's unbelief. And don't beat them into submission. Don't say, "Better go to church," or "I'm gonna do this or that," or whatever.
Yeah.
I'm gonna punish you if you don't go to church or read the Bible. Again, it could be that I've seen these situations in my lifetime that a Christian spouse, it's usually a Christian woman. I mean, look, it's usually a Christian woman married to a non-believer man, and they stay married a lifetime until one of them dies. And my gosh, my goodness, I have seen to where a good, godly, spiritual Christian lady dies, 80 years old, and that husband finally becomes a Christian. I was like, wow, it's amazing. They lived together for 50, 60 years. And he becomes a Christian when she dies. That's God's plan. You know? I hate to say it. Um, but Lori, what advice do you have for a Christian who has an unbelieving spouse? Maybe they've been married a year, maybe they've been married 30 years, but the marriage is good, decent, manageable, but yet that spouse agonizes. The Christian spouse agonizes over the unbeliever's faith. What would you tell that Christian spouse?
Well, just kind of what I was saying before about praying for your spouse, talking to them whenever possible. Keep trying to show your Christ-like faith to them by the way you live and speak, and you're filling your role as a believing wife in this case. Um, you just keep doing that, keep praying, and just believing that God's working, because it's not I'm not going to save my unbelieving spouse, but
Yeah.
Jesus is going to do that.
She's not going to make me holy, but
Yeah.
she can show me a holy example.
Right. Yeah.
Yep. Keep going.
Well, that's what I was
That's
going
all
to
you
say.
got? Okay.
Yeah.
Sometimes I interrupt her and get her thrown off.
That's okay.
Okay. Anyways, again, let me reiterate before we move on. It is important we can't say this enough, for a Christian to date and or marry another Christian. If you're a Christian, you date an unbeliever, and you get married to an unbeliever, it's going to be hard at best. Not unless the person gets saved right away. It may not happen. Finally, we want to touch on the last aspect of this episode. Marriages to where a husband and a wife, they both claim to be Christians, but their faiths are different. And sometimes, now I'm not talking about a independent Baptist marrying a Southern Baptist convention person, or a uh Lutheran marrying an Anglican. Not the faiths that are close. I'm talking about um a man and a woman who marry totally different Christian faith. Say I have a certain faith and she has a totally different Christian faith than mine. I warn against that too. To me, this may be the most difficult situation. Some Christian denominations are so far away from God's word, so far away from God's word. I know people don't want to hear this. And I have heard people in churches that I attended say that carefully. Okay. That, they don't have to be Baptist or Methodist or Presbyterian. They can, any church, Pentecostal or whatever. Just as long as they go to some church that says they're Christian. That's good enough. No, it ain't good enough. John MacArthur says, in his sermons many times, the greatest tool the devil invented was false Christianity. You can drive down the street in Arkansas. We live in Arkansas. You can drive down the street 5 miles and you can see 10 different denominational churches. Which one's correct? They all say they are. If you're about to get married and you and your spouse to be share different Christian faiths, different denominations that are totally different, I strongly caution against this relationship and this union. Okay, you're wondering, what are you talking about? So let me just give you a couple examples. Let's say I'm a Baptist and she's a holiness, oneness, Pentecostal, whatever. Not going to work. Not going to work. Either she's going to have to become a Baptist or I'm going to have to become a Pentecostal. And I'm telling you right now, that's not going to happen. I'm not going to become a holiness Pentecostal. Not going to happen. So I will warn against that. Or let's say, and I hate to use the example, but if somebody comments, they're gonna say, "What about Mormons or Jehovah's Witnesses?" First, they're not Christians, so you can't assume that. Let's say I'm a Christian and she's a Mormon. She's not a Christian. I would warn against that. Or Jehovah's Witness. She's not a Christian. I would even warn against. Let's say she's a Methodist. I would warn against that. Or let's say she's a Catholic and I am a Baptist. I'd warn against that. But if you want to conform to your spouse's faith, that's one thing. It's not going to happen. But other than that, I feel the marriage would greatly suffer if both spouses have differing faiths. The marriage might be great, but there's no spiritual unity. You can't sit down and read the Bible together because you're not going to agree on it.
Mhm.
And the books you buy are going to be different. She's going to buy a book by John MacArthur, and I'm going to buy a book by Benny Hinn. It's different, totally different aspects. She'll buy a book by Joyce Meyer, and I'll buy a book by Joel Webbin or whoever. Just not that I would, but totally different aspects. But uh look, I'm gonna say something that they ain't gonna hear. But I'm gonna say it anyway. This might get me kicked off YouTube. If one of our boys came home and told us, say, I met this awesome girlfriend, I met this awesome girl. She's a church going girl. You would love her. Oh yeah, what church you go to? What's this church down the street out in the country? Oh, tell me more about it. Well, I went to church with her. And it's not like our church. They're different. Oh, how different are they? Well, they speak in tongues and they're jumping up and down and I mean they're just totally different. Or or they say this one church I go to, they're just loving and it's just so they're not judgmental and the pastor's a lesbian lady. Mm, 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 mm. I would tell our son that I strongly disapprove of this union. You should not date this girl. Do you think that's too harsh?
Nope.
Do you think that's what Christian parents do?
Nope.
Why not?
Well, there might be a handful that do, but well, the culture today is all about acceptance and tolerance and love everybody, and you know, everybody. God loves everybody, which He does, but you still have to live a life that glorifies Him and that's holy, set apart from the world. And there's too many churches nowadays that they're not preaching repentance and conviction and sin. It's all God is love, and as long as you love God, that's all that matters. And so that would be a distinct, different faith than what we believe.
Now, how about this? If you are a minister or a Sunday school teacher or whatever in a church, if you have influence in a Baptist church, you should tell the young people of that church, date and marry a Baptist person, right?
Mhm.
You should.
Well, I mean, if you don't, then we're probably gonna get more into this in a minute. But if you go to Baptist First Baptist Church, there's plenty of those. And this person goes to First Methodist Church and you get married. Where are you going to go to church? You're going to go to your own church every week and your
Oh, and
spouse
she's a
is going to
Methodist.
that
Praise
church
God, she's a Methodist.
or you're going to go together to this Baptist church one week and go together to the Baptist church the next week. Like, that's not being unified.
But here's the deal. Here's the deal. I don't even think, I think we have in our Christian culture, churches, we've got to the point to where our boy's dating a Methodist, and God bless him. At least she's not a blue-haired lesbian, or at least our boy's not dating a homosexual,
Yeah.
you know. Well, she's not a Baptist, but she might go to that oneness Pentecostal snake handling church, but at least she's not a. At least it's a she, you know.
Mm.
Have we gotten to that point? Maybe this Eric Kahn quote. Let me read again. Christian parents have a duty to help their children find godly spouses. It is sub-Christian to say, well, once they're 18, they're on their own. They need to figure it out. Maybe Eric Kahn's right. Maybe he's onto something here. Maybe he is. Well, anyways, anything else you'd like to add?
You talking about my mom and dad?
Yeah, just go ahead. Just go ahead. Talk about. Okay, Lori is a good example of growing up in a family where her parents had two different Christian faiths. So talk about that a little bit.
Well, my mom was Baptist. I think she was Southern Baptist, but she was Baptist. My dad was Catholic. And I don't know if the Catholic Church still does this, but in that time, if you were marrying a Catholic and you were not Catholic, you had to convert to Catholicism.
Oh yeah, that's it. Yeah, you got to go through the whole
You had to go
confirmation
through the
process.
whole
Oh yeah,
catechism
yeah.
and
They
all
still do
of
it.
that stuff.
They still does it. And
Um,
why not? Why
well,
don't the Baptists do that?
yeah,
Why not?
Because then you're technically the same faith. So on paper, she was the same faith, but in reality, she still believed like a Baptist. And so she never went to mass with us. I don't remember. She may have gone with us on like they always had like a Christmas Eve service, and so she may have gone with us on special occasions. But and the reason I'm having trouble remembering is my parents passed away at a young age, and so it's
Yeah.
been 20 plus years since I've even had parents alive on the earth. So I'm trying to remember. So I don't think she went with us except maybe on special occasions. All I remember is dad. I have a sister, my twin sister, and I have a brother that's about 8 years older than us. So we went to mass every Sunday. We went to Catholic school until like the 8th grade. Um, and then my sister and I decided we want to go to public school after that. But now, all these years later, my brother is still Catholic.
Mm-hmm.
My sister and I are Baptist, but we're Baptist because we had friends that witnessed to us and we went to church with them. And, we decided it took a while. It took like a year of somebody talking to me about it and me actually reading the Bible for myself. I remember the first time I actually read the Bible on my own. I read through the whole book of Matthew, sitting in one sitting. When I got through the 4 Gospels, I went to my mother and I was like, "Mom, all these books are about the same thing."
And, I mean, and it's not that she's saying that Catholics are wrong in what they believe,
You know?
but it's just that the way Baptists approach things and Catholics approach things, totally different stuff. It's totally different system.
And just like with Baptists, it might depend on the Catholic church you go to, what they do. I know the Catholic church I went to didn't encourage you to read the Bible on your own. You did the Mass, and the only scripture we ever got was whatever was read during the Mass. So reading the Bible on your own was a new thing for me. The first time I read the Bible on my own, I was 18 years old, after being a Catholic my whole life up to that point. And so my mom was like, "Yeah, that's the story of Jesus. That's his life." And I'd never heard that before. um, and so, we went through that childhood. I don't know, when my dad passed away, I don't know if he was actually saved or not. Um, he never, he didn't talk about Jesus like us Baptists do. And it was, talked about God. They did the Hail Marys and then Our Fathers, which we call the Lord's Prayer. They called the Our Father. Um, we did those things, did those practices, but whether he actually had a relationship with God or not, I don't know.
Did your mother, when she did those things, was she doing genuine about it, or was she just doing it going through the motions?
You talking like they're doing the rosary and stuff,
Yeah,
or
whatever she went to mass or whatever it was, did she do it because keep the peace, or did she do it out of genuine
I
desire?
think she probably did it just to keep the peace and to just be there with us.
Right.
I know she, God bless her, she liked some of the TV evangelists. Um, and then
She probably liked the Richard Roberts, and
she liked
she probably liked Richard Robert,
Robinson. What was his
Pat
name? Pat
Robertson, and Seven
Robertson.
Hundred Club. She
Yep.
probably liked Richard Roberts. That's what we watched when we was growing up in the
And
'80s.
she would turn that on, and then she would go leave the room and leave with my dad to listen to. That was her way of trying to
Mm.
get him to believe. But
He probably turned on the golf show or something.
probably. And he was in the Air National Guard, and so he would go on these trips a couple of weeks at a time. And my mom would sneak us to a Baptist church during those trips. And when we were little, we had family that were Baptists, and so we would stay with them and go to their Bible school, vacation Bible school, and stuff like that. But it was never. We all have one faith together. It was my mom's faith and my dad's faith.
So that's a living example of what we mean when we say don't. We encourage you not to do this. We strongly advise you not to marry someone of a different faith, because she's lived through that. Her and her sister and her brother, they lived through that.
Hmm.
Like she said, her brother, and we love brother George and
Hmm.
her sister. They go to church with us. Her sister's a twin,
Hmm.
but some people say they. I don't see the similarity really. They look different to me. But and her brother, good guy, but he still occasionally goes to the Catholic mass, and he's still a professing Catholic. And Lori and her sister are Baptist, and That's just the way the family dynamics turned out. And that's what's going to happen if you marry somebody of a different faith. That's what's going to happen. In closing, wrapping this all up, I am reminded of what two sweet old ladies told me in a Sunday school class. I don't know how old I was. I put 8 to 10 years old. I was little, real young. It was one of the kids' Sunday school classes. And these two sweet old ladies, one was a widow, and the other one, were up in their age. They were both in their 70s. But in the Sunday school class, she told a bunch of us little boys and girls, saying, kids, whenever you start dating, or when you want to get married, make sure you date somebody that's a Christian. I mean, I'm thinking, no idea what that means. I don't know what that means to me. I don't know why that's important. But now I do. That might have been one of the best pieces of advice I've ever gotten from two sweet old ladies in a small church in Kentucky. Date a Christian. That's it. So, and that wraps it up here. So, if you have not been watching, we have two more videos. We have the first video from a couple weeks ago, unequally yoked, and then we have should a Christian date a non-Christian? And then if you like these videos, give us a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel. Tell others about us. And next week, we're going to do something a little different. I'm trying to go back and look at some of the videos that when we first started that we weren't really very good at this. And trying to go back and some of the videos that we thought should have been good turned out pretty terrible. But next week, we're going to talk about 7 things that causes divisions or problems in marriage. So be looking for that. 7 things that causes problems in marriage and what you can do to avoid that or remedy that. And let's see, a few weeks from now, maybe 3 weeks from now, I just saw something on the X, the old Twitter, from it. It was Eric Kahn, um, the Reformed covenantal guy. He said something up to the effect that what was it he said? Um, I think it's about women in submission to their husbands. So we're gonna do a video about that. We're gonna talk about the women being homemakers and staying at home, and we're gonna talk about that in a couple of weeks. But 2 weeks from now, 2 weeks from now, we're gonna do the big one. We've been talking about this since we started, and I'm working on it, putting the finishing touches. 2 weeks from now, physical intimacy in marriage. Those of you having problems in your marital intimacy, we're gonna talk about that, and we're gonna talk about how we can help you make that better. So, anyways, thank you for watching, and hope you like our show, and God bless you. Hope to see you next time, and see ya.